Where's my little recording? It's not happening. Okay, I'll call to order the Arvada City Council workshop for September 27th, 2021. And we'll call upon Kristen Rush. Here.
And Miller.
Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
Councilmember Jones. Councilmember Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Simpson.
Here.
Mr. Marriott.
And thank you, Your Honor. I move that we excuse Councilmember Jones for tonight.
Mr. Jones had originally hoped to join us remotely, but his schedule made that not possible. Votes are cast. That passes 6-0. Mr. Jones is an excused absence. Thank you. Mr. Devon?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, tonight is our first 2022 proposed budget workshop, and to present the information, we have Director of Finance, Brian Archer.
Thank you, Mr. Devon. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to present the City Manager's 2021-2022 proposed revised budget. As you can see in the audience tonight, we have members from all 5 of our work systems here to support and answer any questions you might have. I was lucky enough to be selected to present the budget. Next time I will not miss a meeting. So we are most certainly in a different position than we were 1 year ago. If you remember, a year ago we were presenting to you some severe budget cuts. We had to cut approximately $66 million out of our general fund, $4 million out of our parks fund, $10 million out of our TI funds. Some huge numbers when you talk about over a 10-year model, and those cuts were significant. Our team did a wonderful job implementing these changes during a worldwide pandemic. We are still dealing with some of these issues, but we are definitely in a different situation. As we sit now, the city is demonstrating its resilience. Sales tax has returned to pre-pandemic levels, and in some cases is actually exceeding the levels we saw in 2019. Building activity continues to be strong, and local businesses are starting to see customers return, and in many cases return in droves. This is the second year of a 2-year budget. Historically, we reserve changes to only programs that are either new in nature, required through legislature, or something that is an emergency. Since we're in such a unique year, Mr. Devon and Ms. Gillis asked each one of the managers to bring to them what they needed to continue to move forward the city. And what you will see and what we presented tonight is a significant number of increases. That is the basis for the 2022 budget. We'll dive into that here in just a minute. Hopefully you all received the printed copy. If you did not bring it tonight, you can go online and access it. There are a bunch of numbers. I will try to be as succinct as I can be. If I get stuck anywhere, I will phone a friend. Next slide. So we'd like to start a little bit with the budget themes that we set out during the spring. We had 3 main themes. People first, compliance with the City Council budget and fiscal policy, and TLC, which is taking lasting care. In other words, paying for what we have and making sure we can replace that in the future. As you can see, some of the changes we have made, we will go over these more in depth, but definitely from a people perspective, we wanted to restore the cuts that we needed to make to balance our budget in 2020. We wanted to make sure our 10-year model was balanced, and we maintained our 17% reserve in the general fund. Also the same for our other funds. We will go over those. We needed to revise our revenues to reflect current experience and fund the highest priorities. Under TLC, we wanted to put significant reinvestment back into our core services, equipment, and making sure our internal service funds, that is computers, vehicles, buildings, are funded at appropriate levels. Finally, we did receive Senate Bill 217, and we need to make sure that we were able to fund that mandate.
Why don't you remind the public what Senate Bill 217 is about?
That's body-worn cameras, and those are mandated by 2023 to be worn by all of our police officers.
Thank you.
Next slide. So what I wanted to do is recap where we came from and where we are today with our 10-year model. As you see, these are much larger numbers than we historically talk about. We decided to look at these over the 10-year period of time instead of over year by year. So when we originally started the 10-year model, we were in the negative. We had some adjustments that we were able to make in 2021 to basically balance that out to start anew. And we will go through each one of these numbers here in the upcoming slides, but we were able to add back $89 million to our model over a 10-year period of time. That's a significant change. Some of those dollars need to go off to CIP. We'll describe how and why. Funding to our internal service funds, some changes that affect all funds. These are things like salary range adjustments, insurance. Finally, some requests for positions, and then line items and programs. And again, the majority of that one is body-worn cameras. Next slide. Let's take a look a little bit deeper at our changes to revenues. So as you can see, we had some significant growth in sales tax, property tax, and auto use tax. And all of the other revenues that you can think of net out to about 1.5 million less than what we were expecting. So that includes emissions tax, highway users tax, building activity, anything else. To give perspective, and we talked about this just a minute, I talked about this just a minute ago, we cut 66 million in the last budget. So we were able to add all of that back and an additional 22 million. And we'll talk how we're proposing to allocate those dollars. The majority of the sales tax increase has really come to us through online sales. We've talked about this during our presentations on our quarterly updates. This online activity was through the Marketplace Facilitator Act and allows the city, again, to capture sales that are being done electronically. We talk about this in the past. Those sales would go to the location that they happened. When things are now delivered into the city, like Amazon, like eBay, like Uber, etc., we now capture those taxes. Next slide. One of the questions City Council had for us at our last quarterly were what were the cuts that were made during 2021 and what were you going to do with those in 2022? So this is a high-level look at some of the items we needed to cut to make the budget balance. Again, this is in the general fund. So we froze pay in 2021, both steps and salary range adjustments. We made a freeze in 2024 as well. We reduced line items, and we proposed the elimination of 3 positions by 2024. So about $50 million right there at a very high level. Next slide. We were
Brian,
asked.
excuse me, what area were those 3 positions that were cut?
So they were not identified. They were just 3 positions that the leadership team was going to work on eliminating by 2024. They were all in the general fund, and they would have come from operations. So if you take a look, what we're proposing to add back in 2022, and actually some of these changes were effective this year as well, is we're proposing to put the steps back. We proposed to put the salary range adjustments back. We proposed to add back some of the line items, not all of them, put the positions back, and then we actually ended up with some savings in our health care. HR has presented on this before, but we were very excited to have a 0 increase from 2020 to 2021, and we were able to pass that on not only to the employees, but to the city as well. So that's through the really good work of HR and our healthcare partners and the employees themselves trying to get much more dedicated to their own health. So you can see, again, we didn't put everything back. We put back, again, people first, and then stuff related to TLC. Next slide. We are asking for some additional changes in 2022 at a very high level. At the top, you can see we did have some savings If you remember in our April quarterly report, our year-end update, we had approximately $7.5 million of one-time savings from the 2020 budget. We took about $1.5 million of those and spent those through City Council's approval. We now still have $6 million that we are applying towards our 10-year model. The target area of the urban renewal, Ralston Fields urban renewal, paid off their bonds early at the end of 2020, which was very exciting. What that meant is the PIF for that area went away. It returned back to a sales tax, and that means that that revenue now comes back into the city. The city removes the base from that area, the base that was set 20 years ago, well, 15 years ago in this case, and then returns those funds back to the urban renewal so that they can reinvest in the Ralston Fields area. That's at about an additional $500,000 per year that we did not expect. So that was being added back in and can be used moving forward. And then what you can see down at the bottom is the large categories of expenditures that we're proposing. Senate Bill 217 estimated to cost about $14.5 million over the next 10-year period of time. About $9.5 million of that are the 7 new positions we will need to run the program. The remaining approximately $5 million are the ongoing annual costs needed to run this program. Again, this is an estimate, a very, very good estimate, and we will update council as we move forward with this program over the next few years. We have some additional new positions that we're requesting. One of the items we heard the most of from the departments during the budget hearings is the capacity need, the need for projects. We heard just a little while ago from our IT department on the backlog. We've heard from other areas on their backlog, and this really showed itself up significantly during the pandemic. We made a large reinvestment to our internal service funds. As we talked, this includes vehicles, computers, and buildings predominantly. We're getting the funding up. This is one of the areas that City Council had identified as a concern for us a few years ago. We've done studies and are working to getting those to where we are comfortable with the funding. And finally, anytime we add additional revenue in the form of sales tax, 20% of every dollar has to be spent on CIP. That's the 98-101, put in place in the 60s. And so you saw that the quite large number on sales tax. We are now putting back approximately $16 million into CIP, and we'll talk about how that's being spent. Next slide. So here's the slide on the CIP usage, the proposal. As you can see, the majority of this, a little more than $14 million, is being applied to transportation or transportation-related items. So you have the ADA, you have signal improvements, a bridge program, an engineer to help implement all of this, and a guardrail program. So we took it very seriously, the backlog that we have in that area, and took resources and applied them the best we could. If you want additional detail on these items, they are available in the book under the CIP section. Next slide. Would like to talk really quickly about the pay plan. There will be an additional presentation on October 11th where we can go into further details. One of the items that Mr. Devon proposed to City Council was a change to 2021. Once we were able to see that the city was going to make it through the pandemic better than we had expected, we restored the steps in April. As we moved throughout the year and we continued to do well from a revenue perspective, we restored the salary range adjustment in September. And so that meant our employees were put back to what was proposed before the pandemic. In 2022, we are proposing that we will continue the step process, and we will also include a salary range adjustment, reclass, and other change at a cost of about 3.47%. Now that is a little bit more than what we had estimated, and there is a reason behind that. We are needing to be competitive, and the market is moving faster than we're able to keep up with it. A lot of this market is related to PD, but there's also challenges in other areas as well. Granted, this proposal is a 0.47 greater than what we had expected, but we are committed to making this work. If council remembers, there was approximately $3.4 million remaining at the end of the 10 years in the general fund balance. That is one bucket we could use. We will also be looking at any savings we have in healthcare and any savings we have in ongoing salaries to help apply to this. It's very, very important that we stay competitive and that we're able to implement these changes. Finally, there are 27 new positions requested. I did say that right, 27 new positions that are requested for next year. In parentheses, I put actually 31, and the reason behind that is we have 4 positions that are going to be for 2 years. And these are directly to help our PD in a time of need right now, and that is around their PSTs and their records. So those are 2-year positions. They will go away in 2 years. And so they're new, but they're not programmed in our model because we're going to pay for them with salary savings. We've done this practice before, and so I just want to be completely transparent. If you count our position count, it actually goes up by 31, but 27 are ones that are permanent. And next slide, we can talk a little bit more about these positions. We're trying to look at this in multiple ways. So this is 3 different ways to look at where the ads are going. So I'm actually going to start on the right-hand side and come back to the left. So positions, sorry, no, I apologize. No problem. Positions by work system, so you will see that it's pretty spread out. The one work system that did not have any additional position requests this year was Community and Economic Development. A significant number going to infrastructure, organizational service effectiveness, safe community, and then vibrant community and neighborhoods. Positions by fund, again, the majority being funded out of the general fund with a large share coming out of our utilities. And then if we go back to the left-hand side, we talk about programs. If you walk down the list, you will notice that 7 of the positions are Senate Bill 217. 4 of the positions are permanent or temporary employees that are working in a permanent capacity right now that we are required to make them permanent. 6 to support the capital projects that we have going on and the ones we have moving forward in the very near future. 4 towards technology, 2 to support housing and homelessness, and then finally 4 under our TLC operations area. So a lot of positions and a lot of areas of need. Next slide. So now we're going to jump into a high-level look at our 10-year models. I wanted to present council a visual of our fund balance compared to council's required reserve and the council budget and fiscal policy. As you can see, each one of the funds meets council's required reserve by the end of 2030. Some of them meet it in every year. Some of them have some years where they actually fall below the city council required reserve. Certainly, hopefully, some of these don't come as a surprise to city council. We've talked a fair amount about the needs in our utilities, water, wastewater, stormwater. Golf is continually working through the challenges that were set by COVID-19. Our solid waste program is just getting started. It takes some time to get to its required fund balance reserve. And then finally, through our buildings fund, we made quite a large reinvestment just a couple years ago to increase our efficiencies, and it was supposed to take us 5 years to catch up. We're now down to 3 years, so we're doing better than we had expected. And we'll reap the benefits after we repay that bond. In this case, it's actually a note. So we can certainly run through each one of the funds individually. That's available over the next few slides, and I will run through them relatively fast. So next slide. This is our general fund. We've talked a bunch about that already tonight. As you can see, it sits at approximately $3.4 million at the end of the 10 years. And this would again be assuming council will approve all of the requests. Each one of these include all of the requests that are in your budget.
Ms. Miller?
Mr. Archer, thank you. Fabulous numbers. What are the other financing sources of revenue coming in 2020?
So those are either repayments of notes or items that are not qualifying for any of the other areas. So they can be one-offs, pretty unusual in nature.
Cool, thanks.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
Hey, so make sure, this is always a fun season for us to go through this. So the budget we're going over right now, the 3.4 million, does not include the new budget items that you're referring in here just yet.
Yes, it does.
So you are covering all the new positions.
Yes.
Okay, then maybe I misunderstood your reference to you can use the 3.4 million of our 10-year budget to help pay for some of these positions.
I'm sorry. What it does not cover is the 0.47
the
difference
0.47,
on
okay.
the salary range adjustments.
Okay, that's what I needed.
I
Thank you.
apologize.
Something else that's important to note on this is that this doesn't mean at the end of 10 years, the city only has $3,417,000 in the bank, does it?
No, it doesn't, Mayor. Thank you for that clarification. What it means is that we have 3.4 million over our required fund balance, and our required fund balance at that period of time is $21 million.
Right.
So that means we have $24 million in the bank at the end of 2030.
And that's just in the general fund.
That is correct. So as we go through each one of these funds, you will notice every one of them has their own required set by city council. And so that certainly allows the city, like we were able to see in prior years, if we do have a catastrophe, there's a lot of banks to draw on to help continue operations.
Thank you. Mr. Marriott?
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Mr. Archer, on this particular slide, you know, the thing that I noticed first is that our fund balance is quite high at the beginning and getting higher, and here in about the middle, then it starts going down. So without digging through each one of these, can you give us just a synopsis of, you know, at some point here on this particular model, I get that it's just on this model, but 3 or 4 years down the road, our forecast or our prediction is that we will start spending more than we're taking in. Can you just give us a quick what that's on and why that's the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So we budget 100% of our expenditures, and it's very easy for us to estimate those. So for example, we have all 10 years of a personnel cost built in, and we know what steps are going to look like, and we know what salary range adjustments are going to look like. We know what ongoing costs are in operations. We know what our debt service payments are, and on and on and on from that. And so from an expenditure perspective, we can get pretty darn close. On the revenue side, we need to be a little bit more conservative because we don't have the opportunity to generate additional revenue. We really just get what comes in. And so as the years move out, we become more conservative on the revenue side than on the expenditure side, and that's what leads to that,
Right.
what you just identified.
Okay, thank you.
Which is why we've been able to build the reserves we've built.
That is correct. Yeah. It is one of the costs of doing a 10-year model. It innately makes you more conservative.
I'd say that's a benefit versus a cost. But
It can be from a financial perspective, I love it. It's the greatest benefit we have. But understandably, if somebody doesn't want to look out that far, if you were to cut it off at the end of 5 years, you would certainly have additional resources that you could apply towards something.
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll jump to the next slide in the Parks Fund. As you can see, the Parks Fund is also sitting in good position after what happened last year in the COVID-related open space dollars. are doing quite well. We also made some updates to some allocations and some expenditures in the Parks Fund, which enabled them to end up with a larger fund balance than normal. One of the things I do want to point out, two things I would like to point out. Number one, the Parks Fund reserved a lot of their requests for a 2-year budget cycle. So they do have requests that they let us know about. They do need help. So a lot of these dollars will be applied towards those in the future. That will start next year. They wanted to work through some additional programming and will be coming back. So I wish there was a way we could have reserved some of these dollars off so it didn't look like they had such a large fund balance. The second thing is, built into the Parks Fund, we are currently working on an agreement with Apex on a cost sharing related to our outdoor field usage. We built in a 2-year 50-50 cost sharing. That would be 21 and 22. And then we returned back to the current model, which is an 85-15% cost sharing. If anything comes different from that, we will need to update this model, either positively or negatively, whichever works out. Next slide. The next two are the police tax increment funds. Really nothing more to update on these other to say that they follow the same revenue protocols as the general fund, so they're doing well in the sales tax arena. We've applied those funds in multiple ways to add additional resources to the PD. Really, the 21 fund is sitting in a good spot. It balances at the end of the 5 years. Next slide. If we take a look at the 22 fund, they certainly have additional dollars sitting out in their forecast period of time. We were able to fully fund the 4 police officers that we received from the grants funds just from a couple years ago, so we put those in. They're completely in the model now. And we will need to use some of these dollars to help offset that 0.47, Councilmember Pfeiffer, that we just talked about, because about 30% of that increase lives in the tax increment dollars. Yep. There are some additional large needs under PD, evidence being one of them, retention being another. And PD is working on ideas and ways to help try to attract and maintain additional police officers. And so we're hoping to reserve some of these dollars to maybe be able to implement those. And we will definitely be bringing that back to City Council for your approval, or at least additional ideas on what we can do.
Ms. Miller, did you get your question answered?
No, but I see it in every fund. So essentially I was going to ask is, there's this miscellaneous category in every single fund, and the numbers are really big, and miscellaneous, this isn't an awesome place to put $5 million. So I was just wondering if you could explain it without getting into the weeds.
Miscellaneous in this one is related to interest income, and then other smaller one-offs, things like records, sale of records, and grants. So the challenge is that those aren't consistent from year to year, and that's why it gets dumped in there, but I certainly appreciate your feedback, and we can look at maybe getting better detail there. Next slide. And the miscellaneous in 2020 on this one was the sale of water rights. We've already reviewed the water fund, wastewater fund, stormwater fund in depth, so I'm just going to skip these. I just want to reflect that this does include the proposed approximately 3.6% increase to water rates and the $2 per month fee proposal. This does include that. Next slide. Wastewater, same exact thing, does include the 3% fee increase and the $1 service fee that we spoke about last week. Next slide. On the golf course, we talked a little bit about the challenges they're facing and really understanding what both golf and the restaurant world will look like after COVID-19. There will be changes in this fund moving forward as we figure out the best way to provide these services to our citizens. So more to follow. The fund has been doing better, not significantly, but a little bit better than we had expected, and so is in the positive actually in 2029, and then working towards meeting its fund balance goal by 2030. Next slide. Stormwater assumes a 2% rate increase every other year, and then programs all of those dollars to be spent. Again, in the stormwater fund, we see a lot of these dollars being applied toward capital projects and towards compliance. Next slide. Solid waste, we talked a little bit about this already. The goal of this fund is twofold. Number one, to pay off the purchase of the current carts, actually threefold in this case. Pay off the current carts, which we should pay off by 2026. Meet our fund balance goal, which we should also do in that year. And then by 2030, 2031, identify enough funds that we can cash finance the purchase of carts once the ones we have now wear out. Right now, we're still projecting to be able to do that. We are and will revise this model at the end of this year once we have a good count of all of the citizens and HOAs that are going to be a part of the program moving forward, and we'll bring those updates back to City Council. If Council remembers, the fund was built in such a way that once we met our certain minimums, which we have, that we will be able to do everything else that's in the plan.
Brian, I have a question. When we change out carts, we're going to do that gradually, not all at once, right? Like just replace them just because they're...
I don't know the answer to that. I know we've learned a lot of lessons about how to do those types of things, but I'm sure Jason and the rest of the team will figure out how we replace them. A lot of the carts wear out faster than 10 years too, so some will get replaced as we go.
Just an average then.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next slide. So we wanted to bring back to City Council the challenges that we had put in front of you during the 2020-2021 budget process. And these challenges, some have been addressed, some are still there. Orange is to mean that we've moved a little bit down the road. We haven't solved them. Green, we feel like we're in pretty good shape. And obviously red, we're not any further than we were a year or a year and a half ago. And so you can see we're a little bit more confident on what the outcomes of COVID-19 are going to look like, knock on wood. We have been able to put additional dollars towards our unfunded CIP, but we still have a ways to go there. We've presented and hopefully have a plan that we can do with implementing the water master plan. We're still working through the wastewater master plan and the stormwater plan. We've put some money aside to help address our ADA. That came through our CIP, about $6 million. We have not addressed our street maintenance deficit. We do have a set amount of money going towards that and a very good plan, and we'll continue to work on that. Slow movement on the Parkway. And then we've talked a lot about Senate Bill 217 and the overall cost to implement that.
Mr. Marriott?
Can you expand a little bit on the street maintenance deficit there?
Sure. So we've had different studies done on what it was going to take to fully implement and catch up on our street maintenance plan. And at one time that called for somewhere between $16 and $18 million. And so through the direction of council and Mr. Devon, we've grown our annual contribution to that fund to about $10 million. They've now come up with a different way, a more enhanced way to understand what our needs are. And I think we had a presentation over the summer. We'll get another one coming up that relays what the overall costs are going to be. We're keeping the number here at about 8 to 10 million. It could change depending on how it comes back, and also depending on substrate and cost increases and all of that. And so that is what I'm making reference to, is that we have 10 million, actually it's about 10.5 million that we're putting towards it today, and we know we have to grow to a new number, whatever that's going to be.
Okay. I'll save it for the end, but make comments about that at the end, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Simpson?
Thank you. So, great presentation, Brian. We're really appreciating good numbers. Actually, just building on the street maintenance deficit fund. So, there's a lot of chatter about there may be an infrastructure bill coming. Obviously, I'm guessing we probably don't have that projected for because we don't know what that would look like. But my guess is we could, if and when, that's a big if, but if that does happen, we would be able to potentially make a good dent into
Yes.
this, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we would be hopeful from a financial perspective if that happened that we could participate.
That would be exciting. Thank you.
We're ready. The team is ready.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do we have shelf-ready stuff? Because some of that will probably come out of Dr. I'm sure, to just, that money, if we don't have a plan, we might miss out on some of the money.
Yeah, can I phone a friend here, please?
Sure. Devin?
No, I'd actually like Don Wick to talk, but but Mr. Devin can do it too.
Which question do you want me to answer? Bob?
Well, just more of, do we have shelf-ready projects out of the unfunded $740 million? Do we have a clear, already ready to go off the shelf if we were to get funding?
We do have projects that are ready. And then in addition to that, as Mr. Archer was talking about, with the new software tool that we brought to you this summer, where we talked about how we're reevaluating the integrity of our roads, it allows us to build a much better 1, 5, and 10-year program for all of that. So we'll be in a much better position soon to know exactly what we need to do in what priority order and when.
Because I assume as soon as it comes back and the state knows what to do with money, they're going to,
Yep.
water falls down to all of us. And the first question I know, if Dr. Cog has a say into it, they're going to say, we're only going to fund what's shelf ready,
That's
which
right.
means shovel in the dirt within 6 to 18 months,
Right.
or 12 months. Okay.
Anything you'd like to add, Mark?
Well, I was just going to add that this spring we were able to respond very quickly to a request from Congressman Perlmutter around the Indiana Street Union Pacific Railroad widening project. We have projects like that where we have done a lot of work, and if we needed to get it ready to execute within 6 to 18 months, we can pull projects like that off the shelf.
Next slide. I do want to identify some of the challenges that we are still dealing with. Some we have asked for help through this budget, and some we will need to continue to ask for your help and support. Certainly retention of employees, we talked briefly about that. That is becoming quite a large challenge for the city, for many people, and specifically in our PD. Capacity for new programs. People really want to see new things happen, want to see progress made, and we're behind in some areas, and we're trying to catch up. We're all not certain what COVID will look like. We feel like we're equipped better now, obviously, than we were a year and 18 months ago to address the needs and the challenges, but we don't know what the next curveball will be. And then finally, in capital projects, we just talked about the quite large need, a couple of areas of hope, maybe through the state and through the infrastructure bill, and we'll just see. Hopefully, in the next budget cycles, we can check a lot of these off. Next slide. Finally, I did want to talk briefly about one of the current fundings that we have, and this is the American Rescue Plan that was passed earlier this year. The city has received an allocation of $11 million, a little over $11 million. We've brought 2 items to City Council for approval so far. That's $1.5 million related to public health, negative economic impacts, and that's really related to the work being done in and around Old Town. And then premium pay, which helps to incentivize and offset some of the time that was spent by some of our employees that were on the front lines related to COVID. And so we have about $8.5 million remaining. Staff has been working on allocating these dollars internally, but we would like to have a conversation with City Council about direction and where you would like to see these funds put. So I think on October the 25th, we will be bringing back some information and have a nice conversation in a workshop, and then look for a direction from City Council.
So these the remaining dollars aren't in the 10-year model?
Correct, they're not programmed at all.
Right.
Yep. There are areas of opportunity. We would like to leverage these and really get best bang for our dollar on these. The one challenge, and we talked about this before, is it's becoming a little complicated with whether they're going to be federal and we have to follow all the federal purchasing guidelines, or whether they're going to be more like the CARES Act, where they really wanted you to just get these funds out. Certainly you still have to follow a process, but you don't have as many layers to report on. And so we're still getting updates, and we still only have an interim final rule. We don't have a final rule on these yet.
And this is being dispersed in 2 installments, correct?
That is correct. So we've received one. So in our bank, we have approximately 5.5 million that we've invested. And then once we've spent that, then we will ask for the second and they will send it to us. We have till 2024 to program the dollars. And actually they said you have until 2026 to spend them. Programming meaning fully approved by your council or board, and it's in process. And I think that's all I have for you tonight.
Okay, I'll open it up for council questions. Mr. Marriott.
Thank you. So I have
432 questions.
actually not.
Okay.
fairly easy. So comment more than a question, actually. Thanks for answering my questions along the way. But the comment I would have is our challenge, or the biggest challenge that I've seen from a budget standpoint in my time here on council, has been getting us to where we're doing adequate streets maintenance. And we're here in an environment now of unexpectedly better budget than we expected, certainly than we forecast for a year ago. I don't have any dispute with the actions we've taken as far as restoring steps and salary range adjustments, and I believe that's absolutely the right thing to do, because we certainly shouldn't do anything on the backs of our team who has worked so hard to make this work. But it is, to me, I am a little taken aback that in a year like this, where we normally might add 2 or 3 FTEs, 4 maybe, I can't remember what the most number of FTEs we've ever added in a budget year since I've been here, but here we're way up in the 20s for adding FTEs. And these aren't, backfilling positions we already have. These are all new positions. So I understand parts of them, and I think it's a little misleading, because some of these come out of the utility funds, out of our enterprise funds, so they don't kind of all count the same. But I kind of work my way around in a circle about, I guess I wish that our streets maintenance was a higher priority within our budgeting process. It seems like it always ends up at the bottom, and we don't end up with enough money for it ever. And I understand it's a big number. We're not going to get there in 1 year, but I would sure like to be seeing steady progress towards it. And so, whether that's the streets maintenance fund, if we're funding it at 10 or 10.5 million now, that if that were to be kind of in the program, in the 10-year model, in the however we do it, to increase by $500,000 a year, so that over time, over a dozen years or so, we would be up to 16 million a year or 17 million a year. And I understand we have some new data come in that may tell us a little bit different story about how much we need, but I don't think it's going to tell us we're spending enough. My guess is the data is going to show that we're still not spending enough, and there's some place we need to get to where we're spending enough. And I guess I just, particularly in a year like this, where it seems like there's some opportunities, I'm a little disappointed to see that isn't something that has gotten some elevation, even if it's just a little over time. I mean, it doesn't even need to be that much, but just a little bit over time. So that's really my only comment. The rest of this, I think we're very fortunate, given the economic production that we've had in the landscape that we're living in these days. I think the actions the city has taken is good, if it were me, I would probably just push that farther up the priority list. And I know we'll talk about CIP coming up, because that's the other thing I think that we need to pay attention to, and we'll have that discussion as we come, but acting appropriately there. So comment, really, not a question.
Thank you.
Ms. Ford?
Actually, that makes me think of a question, and I probably should know this, but when we're looking at transportation, where does the ADA and the sidewalks and everything come into that whole equation in terms of, you know, we separate the roads, obviously, but all of them have to do with being able to get around the city more easily. So how do we look at them as a whole and then figure out what gets done first?
So I will take my first shot at it and then ask for help, but I know during the presentations that our team has now incorporated ADA into everything that they do. And so if they're going out to work on a project or redo a road or a street or whatever, they try to identify those needs as it's happening. And then also there's a complete plan that was created that identifies all of the concerns throughout the city, and we then prioritize off of the greatest need.
Yes, I think that's a pretty good description. What we're actually trying to accomplish right now is, as you know, we this year brought to you the ADA transition plan, which also talks about priorities for not only the public right-of-way, but for golf courses, parks, and facilities as well. So you've kind of got those three categories. We recently took the ADA money in CIP and consolidated it into those three categories so that we can more effectively use those funds for these projects. And then within our current CIP projects, we're also using some of that funding to address some of the ADA related issues. So what the biggest issue is, and I'll talk about the public right-of-way since we're talking about street maintenance, is, you know, that's where our biggest need is that we have to make sure that all of the ADA work that we need to accomplish, so ramps, sidewalks, other accessibility, is also coordinated with all of the road maintenance work that we do. And it's a challenge making the geometry of ramps and roadways and slopes and cross slopes all work together. So we know that there has to be additional engineering done. We've made some changes in order to get that in place so that as we go out into the field to do this work, we're more effective when we actually are out there doing it. But all of this has to be coordinated together as we work on all of these projects. And we also need to look at what's adjacent to these projects to make sure that what we're doing can be accessed as they get completed. So we're looking at this as an entire picture as we do all of these projects.
And then can I assume that where we don't have sidewalks, that takes priority even before some of the ADA requirements? Because that would, I would assume, would be a violation of ADA not having sidewalks.
So if you don't have sidewalks currently in place, the ADA doesn't require that you go in and automatically build them. There are some conditions for which have to be met to do that. Our priorities really focus around where is it that people need access to, where are people most frequently. So I would just say City Hall, Old Town, let's just use those as examples. In areas where we have missing sidewalks, those are a priority for Arvada, and we do want to reduce the inventory where there are missing sidewalks, and we actually have a program in place for that. And in fact, when we were talking about the infrastructure money potentially coming here, we have some shovel-ready projects for missing sidewalks that we could put that money toward right away. And of course, we would want to build those ADA compliant as we put them in. And there's decisions around that as well as it pertains to, do we acquire right-of-way in order to widen the sidewalks, or do we come into the public right-of-way in order to make them wide enough where it can fit? And some of those are policy decisions, of course, and some of them are actual field condition decisions that we have to make as we're designing that.
Okay, thank you. And then I just had one other question. I was a little confused by the schedule in the book, because I guess it was my understanding that we were going to change the strategic planning, council's strategic planning to the springtime to correspond with the budget. And it still shows it in January, so I was just wondering if that was just an oversight or if it was actually going to be planned for the spring.
That's not been updated to what the new plan is.
Okay,
So this is, yeah, this will need to be updated.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
So, you know, this is, I agree with my peers on the streets and the sidewalks. And, you know, I've sat here and thought through, we always have, or it seems like we always have a good amount of one-time funds, and we have one-time needs, and I get that. But I've always felt like we could always earmark some of that money to some of those priorities. And not like it's all going there, but we can say a percentage of any one-time funds that are identified can be allocated to ADA and to street maintenance for that 1 year. So if we had 3 million and we said 10% of it would go to ADA sidewalk issue, then 300,000 of that automatically comes off the top, you know, to that subject. I think this is probably a good prime time to discuss this. I think you know, council should probably start weighing in on how one-time funds might be decided like that to direct our priorities, because Mr. Marriott is right. I mean, we can't chip away at these problems that just seem to be growing if we're not taking an assertive effort. It's just kind of like, I think even you, Mayor, said it, like, you know, you pay off that debt, and then you take that money and pay off the next debt. It's almost in that sense, but since you have one-time funds, if I was at home and got a bonus and I needed extra repairs around the house, maybe I'll just do them. But we need to maybe write some sort of guidance or policy from council that says you're going to earmark a certain percentage of any one-time funds for those priority areas. It is a strategic priority for us for ADA, and it is for maintenance, and it has been for, you know, 8+ years. So maybe this is maybe next year we can probably think about something like that. You know, obviously it's too late now, but maybe we should lean that way. I don't know if the rest of council would agree with something like that, but maybe we can ask the team to go back and give us an idea to set some sort of direction around that, so we know off the top automatically it's earmarked. Just a thought. I can't think of a year we didn't have one-time funds. I think we got close one year. I think we did some savings, like $2 million one year, because it was during the recovering from the recession or something. I can't remember what
We
it was.
could, if the council would like us to, we could come back with a draft amendment to the budget and fiscal policy around one-time funds.
Yeah, that would be great. If the rest of council would entertain something like that.
Makes sense.
Could I add a piece to that?
Who wants more money?
Well, yes, of course. But the reason why you're not seeing a request from me for additional money related to pavement is because we did discuss this, and I wasn't comfortable bringing to you and ask a request for additional money towards street maintenance